to acknowledge that I speak on Musqueam First Nation territory, and I'm very happy to be here. I was born and raised in the Fraser Valley, and I'd like to start off by saying that, as you heard in the beginning, that I got started off on what I do, which is work as an activist to protect wild areas and wild systems in local forests. And often it was the timber industry that we came up against. And what I learned in places like Stein Valley and Haida Gwaii and Clayoquot Sound was that here in British Columbia, there was something that was developing, and it was a balance of power, a balance, something that was balancing decisions made by the federal government and the provincial government, and that was decisions made by First Nations governments. We have a history here which is unrolling in this province, in this part of the world, where industry finds a resource and it nails it and nails it and nails it until it's gone, and then it moves on to the next thing. I watched that unfold in the forest industry, and I watched how First Nations governments did the best they could and did a good job in many cases. We saw it in Haida Gwaii, we've seen in the Great Bear Rainforest, we've seen in Clayoquot Sound how First Nations governments made a difference in all our lives. We see how First Nations governments are influencing what's happening with oil pipelines. One of the things that hit our region, a new form of resource extraction in the early 2000s, was the privatization of rivers, the handing over of rivers to corporations to dam and divert them. And it was through that work to try to work and to hold on to wild river systems that we actually became involved with allies like the Treaty 8 group of First Nations in the Site C area to try to hold back and protect that valley, the Peace River Valley, from being dammed and flooded. And it was through that work that I saw how energy issues are now interrelated. It takes much more energy to get energy. So starting with run-of-river down here in the south and being pulled up into the Peace River, I began to see how all these issues were interrelated, and the issue of shale gas fracking came into play. And what I could see is that you and I and everyone in the province hasn't been asked the central question: do we want to go after this resource? Are we at a place where we can go after this resource without killing off more than we get?
So Joe, I'm just wondering, so one of the main critiques of gas extraction in the North is the lack of monitoring. And I'm just thinking back to the comments that you made in your opening comments. To what extent do you think that, whether it's protest or cajoling or embarrassment or negotiation or advice, etc., to what extent do you think that the front-end negotiations need to really stick with the principle of no gas extraction versus saying, okay, if it's going to happen, what are the kinds of protections, monitoring, otherwise need to be put in place? And are there sort of tactical questions, I guess, or substantive questions about whether one actually stays with the principled stand, or whether one tries to say, okay, we also need to think through these issues right through the monitoring and what the role will be?
Well, it depends who one is.
Right. It's very vague.
If one is an environmental group like the Wilderness Committee, whose budget for the year equals the price of one home in this neighborhood, and
that much?
whose people are unelected, I think we can, and it's our job to take, for want of a better word, a principled stand. If you are an elected government, if you are representing the wishes of your constituency, then you're going to be representing the wishes, the hopes, desires, and needs of your constituency. So I'm really clear in my mind what an environmental group is and what a government is. So having said that, from our view, the fracking industry is out of control. There's a ton of regulations that need to happen, but they need to come from those governments that are involved, and that includes, and especially includes, First Nations governments, because it's those communities that are going to be frontline communities that are going to suffer the bad effects and are going to reap the benefits. There needs to be regulation on where, or even if, this activity occurs, but certainly where it occurs. You'll have the likes of me saying it shouldn't occur, but governments will engage. It needs to go through the same forestry, the process that forestry went, where it was, in the early days, a wide open game, and then people said, well, wait a minute, it can't happen everywhere. Maybe we can say where it happens and how it happens. So at the least, there needs to be regulations on where it happens, how it happens, the water, restrictions on the use of water, liability. So many industries plow ahead, making a so-called profit, leaving communities to clean up mine waste, communities without salmon, communities with polluted waterways, and who picks up those bills? We're at a place now where those questions should be asked and answered. And then I believe it's the role of citizen groups, could be environmental groups, could be other citizen groups, to be pushing for what they want within a democratic framework. At the moment, it just feels like we're more and more left to what big corporations want. And I would argue that we need to get organized both as governments and as citizens organizations to start thinking what we want and get those regulations in place. Or this thing is going to be over us so fast and we'll be left with holes in the ground and water we can't drink. A quick word about the last question. And that was that thought that it's going to happen anyway. That's a thought that happens in your home. Sometimes by yourself. Sometimes looking across the kitchen table. That thought happens less in a town hall. It happens less in a rally with 10,000 people. And it happens less in a large public discussion in a community, in a nation, because that's how human beings really face issues. We do it together, or we get picked off one family at a time.